Hey guys, welcome to the 5th episode of Thompsin and Other Disappointments. My guest this week is, he's a comedian, but he's also a tech professional, and he's worked in artificial intelligence and security. And I wanted to pick his brains about deep fakes and like projecting pictures of Brad Pitt on your husband's face and then banging him, like a lot of that stuff. But I also wanted to talk to him about, social media and traditional media and the role that it has played, or they have played, in getting us to where we are now, following the Trumpsters storming the Capitol buildings in Washington, D.C. The resulting conversation, I think, was an hour of really interesting stuff, getting his take on all of these areas. So please give it up for my guest this week, Mr. Richard Brice. Richard Brice, hello. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing this cold and, as I said on our messages a minute ago, politically terrifying morning?
Well, that's a good point. It is pretty terrifying. I watched the whole show unfold last night. But it is a nice morning here in London, at least.
Yeah.
And yeah, obviously, as you can tell by my accent, I was rather gripped with the unfolding events yesterday.
Right, yeah. So you're, I'm going to say broadly North American, but I always tread carefully with this. So you're from the States, or are you from Canada, or?
I grew up in the US, and there's really probably no reason to tread carefully because Canadians and Americans aren't really all that sensitive about people getting their accent wrong, because we know they sound pretty much exactly alike. That being said, no, I grew up in the United States, but I actually am a dual national.
Yeah.
My parents are Scottish, and so
yeah,
that's how I can live and work and have a life here in London.
Sure, yeah. And then, so when did you move over to London?
Oh, a lot. I've been in London about 10 years now.
Yeah.
I've been back in the UK for, a little over 15, and I've lived somewhere in Europe for, getting on about 30 years now.
Wow, okay. So what made you kind of jump ship, if you like? Why you were just naturally sort of geographically curious? You thought, I want to go and explore the rest of the world, or?
Gosh, that's I think it was a combination of opportunity, growing up back and forth between the US and Scotland, and just opportunity came up. I think the first time I really came over by myself was to do an internship in France.
Nice.
That was many years ago, and ever since, and I moved here back in '92.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Good stuff. And so one of the reasons I was drawn to you as a podcast guest was your career within tech, and specifically around like the AI space. And the lean of this podcast, the sort of USP I wanted to give it, was a kind of dystopian look into politics and society and tech. And, ordinarily I have to kind of not think outside the box, but I have to kind of, stretch it a little bit to go, what if this happened? Or what if society became a bit more dystopian? And then lo and behold, like the very day you're like...
We have yesterday
right
as a prime example of the confluence of tech and AI, and I think, kind of a post-truth society.
Right.
And then just classic rabble-rising and inciting of riots.
Yeah. What's your
all coming together at once?
What's your sense of what's got us to where we are from a tech and media perspective, and as an American?
Tech and media perspective. That's a good question, because I think it certainly plays an influence. But there's a lot of other influences. So tech isn't, it's all fine and well to say, we have social media now. And that's certainly a contributing factor, but it's not the only one. But in terms of social media and the tech that's available, it is certainly, we live in a time now where you can both amplify your messaging, at the same time you can make it very precise. In other words, what we can do in social media or any online media really is you can have very precise profiles so that you can manipulate your messaging such that it really plays to that person's confirmation biases, that really plays to um, their unconscious bias. But at the same time, you can hit a massive amount of people, and that's really those two variables are what are being leveraged um, in the troll farms, and being leveraged in all kinds of different media and marketing, whether it's products, whether it's political views, or whether it's just sort of the irrational diatribes that Trump does on Twitter.
Yeah.
Believe it, I don't even have a Twitter account.
Right. Well, I can tell you, I mean, you're half kind of missing out because it is a lot of fun, but you're also like, don't even expose yourself to it because it's a fucking dumpster fire. But
That's my view. I don't want to. When it first came out, I fooled around with it, and I just thought, another stream of nonsense. That's the last thing in the world I want.
It's
I did
great.
get onto.
It's great for, like, if you're a news junkie like I am, to go on there and then see like a live feed, like real time updates of what is happening on the ground in something like what went on last night. Is invaluable, because then when you flick back to Sky News or whatever, and then you've got their correspondence, really all you're getting is that journalist's perspective at that time in that exact location where they are and what they can see, and the people that they're talking to. But with Twitter, it's I mean, it can be quite overwhelming because you've got this, like you say, it's just a deluge of noise and nonsense. And also, there's an argument that with traditional media, the journalist is at least supposedly a professional journalist who would talk to people, and if it's not an interview, then it's something that they would source, and there's a responsibility there. Whereas with bots and shit on Twitter, what is the quality really of the information that you're getting in that?
With the bots and the bot nets and stuff. I mean, you don't even know nowadays if you're engaging with a human being anymore. It's a strange world that we live in, and a lot of people, myself, nobody really can distinguish. We're at that point where it's not that hard to create a bot that just spews out sound bites.
I added a Chrome extension.
That volume, across a platform like Twitter or across Facebook or wherever, can very much appear to be real and truth, because so many people are saying this.
And it's only if you can be bothered to manually copy and paste the string, like the sentence that's been pasted in there 1,000 times, that you might just catch that actually it is a network of bots that are all saying the same thing and spamming.
But we're all being deluged with all of this noise and information. Anybody who has the time to do that might want to reconsider their priorities. That's just and nobody's doing that, and so what ends up happening from a psychological point of view is that it's it's all around your unconscious bias, and that's what they're playing on. And we all have them. We all have these biases, and we're all vulnerable to them. I think Charles Bukowski, the writer and poet, once said, you'd have to be really arrogant to think that you've escaped all the hooks and nets that are out there. And it's true. So, if you're seeing, thousands and thousands of messages that are confirming what you want to believe, that, storming the Capitol is a really good idea. Because the election was stolen, and you're seeing thousands and thousands of messages confirming that, you buy into it.
And this is there's two things that I find quite depressing about last night's events. Is the first thing is you have this idea, this concept of people living in bubbles and echo chambers. And we've talked about that a lot since Brexit over here and Trump over in the States. Usually from a sort of liberal or like lefty kind of centrist standpoint, like how could Trump have won? Because everyone I know says that they voted for Hillary Clinton. And the same thing with Remain. It's like, well, everyone thought that Remain was going to win, so how could this possibly? Well, it's because you're all living in your own individual bubbles. So there's that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the unconscious bias.
Yeah,
you're living in a bubble. However, I would say, one needs to have boundaries. I mean, there's a point where, in my view, or at least what I do, is particularly online, is I'm not going to expose myself to these extremist views, and in fact, I'm not even going to engage with them because nothing I can say will convince them otherwise, and nothing they can say will convince me otherwise, and we're just going to end up getting into a nasty argument. For me, nothing to be gained. So it's difficult. So, am I in an echo chamber, not engaging with the other side, or where do we find that balance? In other words, because I think both are legitimate.
Do you think social media companies could do well? I know the answer to this, but do you think they could or should do more in terms of policing what is and is not a legitimate account? Because in my mind, I'm thinking like it's not a big ask from a web developer's perspective or like a middleware developer to be able to construct some software that just checks if the person that says that they're living in Michigan is actually in Michigan. Like it's
that's a really so now you're going up my tech alley because I work my main area is cybersecurity, and that's a really good point because it isn't. And that's a pretty fundamental thing in cybersecurity, authentication.
Yeah.
Is this source authentic?
Yeah.
And are they authorized to do and say the things that they're doing and saying and accessing? That's pretty fundamental stuff. So there's a lot of technology out there to allow for that level of authentication. So it's definitely doable.
Yeah.
And the social media platforms are doing a lot. And I think, Facebook has, for example, implemented a number of measures to verify the authenticity of users and user accounts. There's obviously lots and lots of caveats to this. One that comes to mind is some people that are going through some kind of transition in their life, whether it's a gender transition or whatever transition they're going through, and they want to create a persona online. Was that authentic or is it not authentic? I don't know. I'm not going to get into that debate, but it's a legitimate. I think it's a legitimate caveat. But all of those things can be sorted out. The question then is there a place for anonymity then online?
Yeah. I suppose that's the thing.
There's value to anonymity.
Yeah, it becomes a sort of free speech in the modern era kind of debate then. It's like I should be able to go on and join the conversation and play with some ideas. It's in a similar way to how stand-up comedians do. Like they should be able to stand on a stage and say some nonsensical rubbish. And then if it floats, if there's some claps afterwards, then great. But if there's not, then it sinks without trace, and it's no harm, no foul.
And it's the only way you can write comedy.
Right.
It's all you can sit and write stuff, but I need to do it in front of an audience to see if it lands or not.
Yeah, and
it's the only way.
I suppose the comeback on that, or the counter argument to that, is that the difference would be that if a stand-up comedian goes into a dive bar and then tries some outrageous jokes and there's silence, the worst thing that happens is that the comedian hangs his head in shame or goes and buys a drink and then walks up the stairs and then leaves, and then that's the end of it. And maybe a few people say, oh, did you see that guy, that aid guy? Oh, that was fucking terrible. Like that's the end of it though. Whereas a guy goes on Twitter,
there's definitely a question of stakes.
Yeah.
and criticality that, certainly if the president of the United States is posting rubbish on Twitter, the stakes are much, much higher than if if I bomb on the night and my horrific jokes don't land. Those are worlds apart in terms of stakes. But what we're getting into is, what is and isn't true, which, at the risk of getting overly philosophical, it's a question that has plagued the intelligence community ever since there's been intelligence. Because we have so much information online now, your average schmo like you and me are now being exposed to the reality that truth is a much more complex thing. It's not binary. Things aren't just true and not true. It's why we have fuzzy logic. It's why we have these grays. And
that's true. I remember hearing a guy talk about like the difference in news and media now was that, like, back in the 60s or 70s, if a political scandal broke, it would be on the front page of, let's say, 3 newspapers, and then it would be on like CBS News and ABC, right, that night, and then everyone would hear it or see it on the news, and then they would all be shocked. They'd be like, I can't believe Nixon did this, or I can't believe. But now what happens is people say, oh, did you hear that Trump's tax returns show that he's fucking broke? And the instinctive reaction is like, people go, oh, where'd you hear that? And you go, on the news. And they go, not my news. Like, people have their own individual...
Well, that's, again, confirmation. That's confirmation bias. Once you've built this model of perfection, or you've built a model of what you think the president is or whatever, any information you get from that point forward you'll just say, oh, well, that's got to be fake news. But what is truth is a little more complicated. First, what they do in the intel community is, there's loads of ways of doing this, but the idea is, knowing something to be true, knowing something to be false, and then the uncertainty. Right. How certain are we this particular fact is true?
But then how would you? Can you give us?
That this particular fact is false? And once you introduce uncertainty and unconscious bias, that's when everything kind of goes up in smoke. And
can you give us an example of that, like from an intelligence perspective?
A particular target. You're trying to identify a target, and you need to know whether it's a legitimate military target or it's not. Right. And you've got loads and loads of information coming in saying different things. So now you've got lots of uncertainty as to legitimacy. Maybe that isn't even a target. Maybe the thing doesn't even exist. Yeah. Someone has deliberately injected some information into your pool of data to say, yes, there's a target there.
Yeah. So, I see. Right. So let's imagine that there's a war room with a few decision makers in there, and they've got intelligence analysis coming in, and someone says this wedding in Beirut is actually a front for a terrorist meeting or something. And then is it the sort of scenario where you would then have to go away?
That's a better example than the one I just came up with. Yeah, that's a good example whereby you're in a situation where you're getting different information.
And then do you have to qualify where you heard that from, how reliable that source is, and whether they might be telling you that it is a terrorist meetup?
Provenance is key.
Right.
Provenance is key to is it a legitimate source? And this comes back to what we were saying originally: authentication. Yeah. Is this an authentic source? Is this even a reliable source?
So why don't
obviously
Twitter...
a troll farm is not a reliable source, but we've not authenticated it. Yeah. We don't even know it's a troll farm.
Why don't Twitter just put something like that in then? What do you think the reason is for it?
Well, I'll put myself in Twitter's shoes. There's legal reasons that it's difficult for them because, um, in fairness to Twitter and Facebook, it's really hard for them to be the final arbiters of truth because it is far too complicated. There's too many sources, and who are they to say? It can be complicated. Your wedding example is really good. Is it a wedding or is it actually a terrorist meeting?
But
Got
I
lots
just
of
feel like
information from different sources.
like
But wait. Let me answer
sorry,
the question.
sure,
Let me
yeah,
answer the question. Yeah.
yeah.
So from a legal perspective, I think it's unfair and actually unrealistic to expect them to be the final arbiters of truth. But I think they could do more to identify legitimate sources. Authenticate, is that real? But then we have to ask, is there a place for anonymity? Because if everybody has to show that they are legitimate, then
yeah, it sort of goes back to your example before.
yeah. So and that's the quagmire that the social media finds itself in. It's impossible for them to be the final arbiters of what is and isn't true. Although they're doing a pretty good job on the extremes. So, for example, when Trump was posting it, the election was stolen, they'll automatically put in a disclaimer.
Yeah.
But that's on an extreme. But that's in a situation where we know for a fact something to be false.
Yeah, I see. I mean, I feel like they could do more. I mean, they could just wait, if I'm bored one day and I decide I want to put some rubbish out into the ether, and I'm going to start a rumour that Les Dennis has sex with livestock a lot.
Okay.
So I go onto Twitter, I set up a brand new
Hang on a sec. To make this even more interesting, let's assume that that's actually true.
Okay.
Because from a legal point of view, then that becomes an even more interesting thing.
All right. Okay. Let's play with the idea. So Les Dennis routinely has sex with livestock. I've somehow uncovered this scandal, and I go on to Twitter because I want to get it out in the open. I set up a brand new account. It's just an egg. It's anonymous.
Okay.
I use one of the usernames that Twitter suggests, and it's just like, John57821, and then I put it on there. And somebody, by hook or by crook, is searching for Les Dennis stories, sees this, retweets it to their followers, and it catches fire and snowballs or whatever. Now, what responsibility does Twitter have to have put in a feature or restriction to stop anonymous accounts like that with their first tweet or first 10 tweets or 20 tweets, that they are then not automatically that they can't go viral, basically? Like, you can use Twitter, you can read other people's tweets, you can even favorite them or retweet them, but your ability to just sign up for a brand new account and then start spreading shit, especially when, I mean, in this example now, we're saying Les Dennis does do this, but even if he does or did, there is still centuries of legal precedence there to protect him from that information going straight out.
Exactly. That's why I said let's pretend that it's true for a minute,
right?
Because that's still defamation.
Yeah.
Even if it's true, it's defamation. Who's liable? From a legal point of view, Twitter holds some liability because they were the platform on which that horrific piece of information was spread, that bit of defamation. And it goes back to authentication. Should Twitter authenticate each account? I'm on the fence because I think there's still some value in anonymity, but at the same time, it's about the only. I mean, imagine not just some schmo doing that. Imagine a troll farm doing that.
Yeah.
Create thousands of accounts.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's how it goes viral. It isn't just one schmo and then somebody picks up on it. It's the thousands of troll accounts. And it's not just John 123, they've gone to these troll farms have gone to some level of sophistication where that profile looks very real.
This is
They've
something.
got a photograph.
Yeah.
They've got a profile. They've got some tweets, so it all looks pretty. And it looks real.
They're like not new accounts either. Have you seen those ones where it's like, this person has been online since 2010, and you're like,
vintage troll farm, all of that. So these are looking incredibly legitimate, and there's hundreds of, probably, globally, there's millions and millions and millions of these fake accounts, pumping all of this nonsense and rubbish, and defamation in some cases. So that's how it ends up going viral. So, but the thing is, though, it's all fine and well to say, well, Twitter, you go fix it. Facebook, you go fix it. But it's a difficult thing to fix. And unfortunately, our legislation, our government, our legal process isn't sophisticated enough to legislate this sort of thing. I mean, just think about when, the Cambridge Analytica story broke, and they were interviewing people from Cambridge Analytica and so forth in the U.S. Congress. And some of the questions the congressmen were asking were shocking. For me, it was shocking. And I thought, why are you even here? I mean, one of them, thinking he was being really clever, wanted to ask all about Ethernet.
Yeah.
When I connect my laptop, does that have anything to do with this?
Yeah.
Well, kind of.
In a way that they've both got cables, but that's
well, exactly. So you and in fairness to these perhaps older or less tech savvy legislators, in fairness to them, they're not experts in.
It's quite annoying, though, isn't it?
They're completely ignorant to it. So it's difficult to get our government to come up with good legislation, to just push it onto Twitter and say, "Will you fix it?" Because they're overwhelmed. They're like, how do we authenticate all of these bloody troll farms?
It's fun. Like as a guy that watched some of the footage from those hearings, I remember thinking probably what's happened here is that they've got a team of advisors who actually know a little bit about this stuff, but they, as the congressman or senator or whatever, they want to be on TV, being seen to be challenging big tech and asking tough questions and so on. So they, I imagine, insist on being the one that asks the questions. Or maybe that's a law that only senators and only congressmen can ask the actual and sit there.
Well,
in the house.
The narcissistic personality type is going to be attracted to being a politician. So they're of course going to put themselves in a position that's way beyond their capability.
Yeah, but then the unfortunate, like the inversion of it is that like the narcissism should dictate, like should force you to put yourself in a position where you look good, but forcing yourself in front of the cameras with the lights on you and everything and looking ignorant about this stuff and asking questions that are completely irrelevant makes you look like a fucking idiot.
Yeah, but that's what they do.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, and also a corollary to that, let's say Twitter says that's it, no more troll farms, you're going to have to present some kind of ID, and we're going to go through some process to authenticate you. The technology's there, and it can be done. It might be onerous, but there's another thing around AI and big data and tracking. I'm not personally comfortable with the level of tracking that is currently done. And it's not the government I'm worried about. It's these big corporations. Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter. They are all tracking your every movement online.
Why?
And they're using.
Why is that?
Why are they doing?
Yeah.
Oh, that's insanely valuable. information.
Is it just as innocent as, look, we want to know where you go on a daily basis and who you interact with so that we can use it to sell to advertisers and direct marketing to you? Is it that sort of, shameless and...
That's a huge part of it, and that's the biggest driver is it goes all around, profile statistics and big data, whereby it's not so much a question of, nobody really cares, that you had a phone call with your nan,
No.
or what was said during that conversation. What it is it's creating a psychological profile of you. It's figuring out what your unconscious biases are, and that's quite easily done. And that's why all of those stupid, memes pop up. Which of these two do you like? It's a psychology test that you've just been tricked into playing, and then they create profiles, and with those profiles, that's how they know how to make the messaging more precise. Like I was saying at the beginning, we live in an era where you can both amplify your message but also make it very precise. So you've got all of these profiles for all of these people because they've all been clicking away, and that's all been tracked. And these guys over here, they're a bit authoritarianists, and a very authoritarian messaging works really well on them. But these liberals over here, they like the freedom messaging.
Yeah.
So you build the messaging for freedom, but you're still manipulating.
Yeah. I think the thing
towards an objective, either to buy something, to believe something for a political opinion, so that they vote a certain way, and we are seeing it being used for some pretty nefarious things. To believe something that's absolutely untrue, like Russia didn't invade Crimea. Well, they did, but they put out all of this messaging, and there was enough of it that some people just doubted it and didn't know what was true.
Yeah, I think I sort of I'm not on the fence, but I'm not far off the fence, if that makes sense. So like with data collection, I understand and accept that these companies do collect data, and it doesn't particularly bother me if they then sell that to Coca-Cola or, I don't know, Benk, who make this monitor that I'm looking at, to decide if I'm within their target demographic that they want to sell more shit to. It doesn't really... maybe it bothers some people that their personal data, like they feel a bit violated, but for me it doesn't. I'm actually almost grateful that the adverts that I'm going to see as a result of that collection are going to be more relevant to me, because frankly, when you watch, catch up TV or something, and you get more refined, specific adverts, it's not as annoying as when you watch terrestrial TV, and then, I'm a 40-year-old man and I'm sat there watching adverts about tampons. So that side of things doesn't really bother me, but I think where I and a lot of people kind of get off the train is like the fear factor when you think, well, okay, it starts with Coca-Cola and Benk, but does it finish with foreign governments or domestic governments who then decide, right, we don't want to give childcare to anyone that, like childcare vouchers or something, to anyone that doesn't tick these 5 boxes. And then suddenly, through no fault of your own, because you behaved in a certain way on the internet, or because your profile doesn't tick enough boxes, then you're restricted. Like, that begins to then feel very Big Brother-y, very 1984,
Well, let me ask you then. Let's look at it a different way. We all accept that we all have unconscious bias. And that's a vulnerability in everyone. And if it's a vulnerability, it can be exploited. So we all have these unconscious biases, and if I can know what your biases are, I can create messaging that manipulates that. And it can manipulate you to do or believe all sorts of things that you wouldn't perhaps ordinarily, or for that matter, go quite against your values. And that's what it comes down to for me, is whilst I too am not that fussed with, using this mechanism to get me to buy more Coke, because I've lived with advertising and that my whole life, and I pretty much accept it. But that's not what's happening. It's not just to buy more Coke. It's to storm the Capitol. We have four people are dead now. It's not just to buy Coke. It's also to cover up the fact that Russia invaded Crimea, and in that process, they shot down a passenger aircraft where 500 people were killed.
Yeah.
So I'm personally not comfortable with that mechanism just being allowed to be used with no regulation whatsoever, because I am vulnerable to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Y'all are vulnerable to this, and tracking this much of information allows that to be happening, because if by tracking all of your information, all the things that you click, then you can start identifying what that person's biases are and how their psychological profile works. And once you've done that, you can start getting that messaging just right for them so that they believe whatever you want them to believe and do something that is, quite against their values or quite dangerous, but serves your needs. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. And that's exactly what we saw yesterday.
They never call it radicalization, do they, when it's somebody that's been fed a load of rubbish on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and it has manipulated them into truly believing that someone is stealing the election from them, that this is a threat to America. In the same way, the exact same way
they believe it hook, line, and sinker now.
Yeah. But it is the same exercise as happens in the Middle East when, a sheikh says to 5 young guys, like, these Americans are trying to steal the blah blah blah, and they get radicalized into thinking that this is some sort of holy war that I need to be fighting, and then I can go up to heaven, and
Yeah, I think maybe radicalizing is a good word for it, because but that's
they never call it that though.
The mechanism is the same.
Yeah.
But social media, the point of the matter is it's massively amplified.
Yeah,
and
you're right.
And precise. So, the sheik just saying this, he's only going to be able to have one messaging and hit, a fairly small audience, whereas these troll farms can have thousands and thousands of different messaging and hit hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people.
Yeah, and through things like, well, A/B testing is probably not so prevalent with like bot farms and something, but I imagine that there are implementations that are similar to A/B testing. So like they might send you advert 1 that says Crimea was liberated on this day 2 years ago or something, and maybe you don't believe that's a little bit too hard for you, so you just keep scrolling. Well, now they can see that you've been online and that you scrolled right past it, you didn't click on it, so now they know to tweak it. Let's feed in option B, and that's exactly the one it. And then I guess that gets logged in the database that B was more successful than A. A gets retired. B is now the dominant one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to move on actually a little bit from
sure.
storming the Capitol.
It's my particular area.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's all interesting stuff.
Interest professionally. So.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit. This is slightly contentious, but I've wondered about this for a while, right? So, actually, it's not completely unrelated to events of the last couple of days, but with deep fake technology, last week we heard a phone call taped of Donald Trump basically begging the Georgian senator to find 11,000 votes, and it went viral, and all the people that you think would care about it really cared about it, and all the people who didn't pay any attention didn't pay any attention. But let's say that on the tape he had admitted murdering someone, something undeniably bad that should end his career immediately and land him in jail. How far away do we think we are, from an AI professional's perspective, from audio of someone like Donald Trump admitting that and it being deep fake audio and it causing a storm?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer,
Okay.
but um, I think deepfake technology is, in light of everything we've just said,
Mm,
um, from my perspective, I find it a little alarming
mm,
because, if this video confirms your already held bias, even though it's fake,
mm.
you're going to believe it. It looks real.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, we're able to do this with absurd headlines. Now there's video. I
Yeah.
mean, how much? I mean, seeing is believing, isn't it? So, I think it's quite alarming, and I actually don't know. I mean, I can barely figure out how we can control, the headlines to be accurate, let alone, these videos that will surely be proliferating soon
Well,
and being designed by teams of people
mm,
with a lot of sophistication and know-how to make them look as real as they can.
yeah.
Uh, it's coming.
Oh, for sure. Like, I mean, I heard an example. He didn't name who had generated it, but it was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and it was an example deepfake audio, so no video, and it was of him, and it wasn't just snippets from different podcasts and stuff. It was computer generated audio, of him talking about a basketball team, or like a baseball team comprised entirely of chimpanzees, just to make it obviously ridiculous and something that he had never actually discussed. But it sounded, I'm not going to say it sounded 100%, it sounded about 90%. So, like, if you listened very carefully, you could detect a couple of little, like, tiny glitches. But if you didn't know that you were listening to deepfake audio, you would have taken it as gospel, because it sounded
You would
exactly
just
like it.
the little bits and then throw a little bit of unconscious bias on top of that,
Right.
and you've got a winner.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, so this was about 18 months ago, or a couple of years ago, that he played that, and he was like, the future's going to be weird, guys. And I'm thinking, if that's 2 years ago, and how quick both you and I know tech moves, I have to assume that somebody from that team has, gone on, done their own thing, or been contracted by a foreign government, or one of, like, our governments, and so it's coming. I can't see it taking much longer than, like, 6 months or a year before the first, like, Biden tape comes out where it sounds like him.
I couldn't possibly comment on how long, because deepfake technology has been around for quite a while now.
Mm.
But at the same time, I see your point. The speed at which not just technology goes, but the speed at which these troll farms and this false messaging goes,
Mm.
is radical. They're already making very sophisticated, very real looking profiles.
Mm.
Now let's throw some video on top of that. Not just a meme of an eagle being badass, but
Yeah.
whatever. I'm not that creative. I can't even conceive of what video I might make to manipulate people, but surely they're out there. Like you're saying, Biden saying something incendiary or
Yeah.
whatever. I can't see it being far off where a deep fake video goes viral and people believe it, and and what will happen at that point is there'll be a whole camp of people that doubt its legitimacy and a whole bunch that'll say no, it is real.
Yeah.
And then you get into that really deep philosophical argument of what is true,
Right.
what isn't. How do you know
Yeah.
you weren't there? And then it just becomes this absurd area where there'll be a significant part of the population that will believe it, mostly because they want to believe it, but
Yeah.
they will,
It will become this situation.
We can't possibly be far away from that.
Yeah. It'll be one of these situations where the trajectory of it will be there's video footage of like Biden admitting to something scandalous. It will be broadcast on Fox News, because Fox News don't want to fall behind the internet so they'll just retail it out.
Or Russia Today will do it.
Yeah.
Or there's numerous illegitimate or pseudo legitimate sources, or it'll come out on one of the obviously illegitimate right wing crazy sites or whatever.
Yeah,
It'll
yeah.
go viral.
And
Yeah.
then, like, because CNN or MSNBC don't report it, uh, all of the guys, like, they'll say, oh, well, we've looked into it and we have determined that actually it's a deep fake. But then all of, like, the Newsmax, Fox News guys will just be like, oh, well, yeah, like, covering up for your boy again, I get it. So it's going to be this situation where the truth
Exactly.
is
Great.
subjective. It's going to be, that's not my truth. I believe that he actually said that. It's on tape. I've seen it.
And that's already happened numerous times, not specifically with a deep fake video or a deep fake audio at its core, but it's already happened. I mean, that's why I bring up Crimea all the time, because that's that happened
Yeah.
in Crimea. Russia invaded, and just the fact that the soldiers tore off their insignia doesn't mean it wasn't Russia. Yet, they bombarded and injected a false narrative into the media stream, and it was enough to create that doubt, just as you're saying. And some media sources were reporting it and some weren't, and it was enough that effectively because of confirmation bias and a number of other things, there were some people that now were invested in believing one narrative or another narrative.
Do you ever think it'd be funny to because
which one's true?
Bot farms spend a lot of time sending out distorted, nefarious narratives to stuff. Like, do you ever think it'd be funny to just contract in a Russian bot farm and its only purpose is to just construct a narrative that is entirely positive and like hippy dippy, just like the Mandela effect kind of like rumor was it that in the 80s where everyone said that he died but he hadn't?
I actually really like that idea. That I've never even thought of doing, but with like a good comic twist to it.
Yeah, I mean, instinctively I'm thinking Les Dennis fucking livestock, but maybe we should go for a bit more positive than that.
Maybe something less defamatory, is that a word? Less defamation and more comical.
Yeah, like a sort of the rumors, the sort of jokes about Chuck Norris where they say Chuck Norris once fucking killed a guy with the exaggerated.
He died.
Yeah,
so just look at me, he died.
But something like that about a kind of C-list celebrity.
There was a similar thing about a guy walking on water.
Oh, really?
And turning water into wine. Heard about that guy? Or
he sounds great.
Yeah, I think he was a pretty nice guy. Or speaking of this, I think you saw when Rudy Giuliani did the press conference in between like a porn shop and like a crematorium or something, in the parking lot of Four Seasons Landscaping.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the sort of thing I would like to inject into the media stream. But I think that one seemed like it did happen.
Yeah.
But did it? Now I'm not sure.
Yeah. Like, it's almost like, are they as clever as they would have to be to think ahead of time and go, look, if we do it in between a dildo shop, like out in a car park of the Four Seasons, whatever.
Nobody's going to believe that. That's utterly absurd that they will.
So then the next time we do some crazy shit, they won't believe that either. So it's all about distorting and, making people not trust.
That's how religions are created.
Right.
That's how religions are created. So, but maybe we could come up with something with a comedy angle to it. I kind of like this idea. Never really thought of doing it.
Yeah.
But
I think we pick like a C-list celebrity, like I don't know. See, this is where I'm showing my total lack of knowledge of like reality shows. It's hugely embarrassing for me. Let's think.
You should be ashamed of yourself not being up to date on your reality shows, quite frankly.
Yeah, I occasionally I have watched some, like when my girlfriend's like, "Can we just watch something trashy tonight and just pass out to it?" But that is exactly what happens. I turn it on for her and then I'm out like a light. But maybe somebody like who's the guy that, like one of those like pretty guys that was on Love Island like 3 or 4 years ago. Like, we could start a bot farm and all it is there for is to send out this narrative that he I don't know, fucking ate a crocodile in one, or saved like a village of African children by killing a dragon, or so. I don't know, something outrageous would be good.
I was thinking more just go down the absurd angle might be more fun. Like, he's joined the circus and now he identifies as a dwarf clown.
Sure, yeah, I'm supportive of
He's
this.
actually 6 foot tall. And how do we feel about this? Should we change his pronoun to clown or something? Yeah, the more absurd, the funnier. That's why that whole, Four Seasons landscaping thing was it was so good. I mean, it was like from a sketch show.
Yeah, it looked to me like the end of an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. It was so fucking
exactly
retarded.
That you're just like, but it was true. So I want to come up with something as brilliant as Four Seasons landscaping, and then make that go viral,
Yeah.
and then everyone's debating, did it happen or didn't it?
Yeah, it's like sort of trying to get your comedic creativity up to the same level as their incompetence, and that's no small task.
No small task.
Okay, so let's talk sex robots, Richard.
Okay, sure.
So this is something else I wanted to chat about. So I was watching the Elon Musk press conference about his Neuralink.
Is he a sex robot?
No, I don't think so. Robot, right. Maybe, not sex robot. But he was doing his press conference about Neuralink, and he put the Neuralink into the pig, and then they showed some like graphs and stuff of like what the pig was thinking and so on. But anyway, like as he was talking about what the potential was for Neuralink, and that as it goes through its various iterations and new generations and stuff, then it could get to a point where the blind can see, and you could have like lenses, and the lenses would sort of give you like you would basically be a cyborg. You'd be connected to the internet always. You'd always have access to information. I have quite bad tinnitus, so for me, I was thinking maybe it can give me like better hearing, or so the possibilities of having this thing connected to your brain are pretty limitless. And I was thinking, because I'm, the natural point that you go to is like, what could this do for my sex life? So I was thinking,
well, that's the big thing about really big, technology. It only ever becomes really big when it can be applied to pornography or sex.
Right.
And that's true for all certainly media-based technology. I mean, the internet, obviously.
Yeah.
DVDs, obviously.
Sure.
VHS. It didn't really take off until you could go to your neighborhood VHS rental place and get porn.
Really?
So that's my theory, at least.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like
your cyborg chip, if it can be applied to sex somehow, then yeah, it's definitely going to take off and be viable.
I wondered if, like, just kind of linking back to the deep fake stuff, you could have lenses that would eye track in the same way that you have these selfie apps and they can detect where your eyes are and put filters on your face. You could eye track, say, your husband, and then project like Brad Pitt's face onto your husband that you then see.
There you go. Yeah.
And wives and girlfriends and stuff would be fucking Brad Pitt, and the guys would be happy because they would just be like, I'm getting a lot of sex at the moment. But then it's also like
sounds both practical and bleak at the same time.
Yeah, it sort of treads this line of like, at what, like we were talking earlier about what is the truth and what is a lie when you get into this arena. But it's like, what is cheating? Like for centuries we've been thinking cheating is when I go down the road and then bang one of the milkmaids or, something like that. But now it's like, well, what if you're shagging me but thinking about, and I would have no access, presumably, to what you're seeing in your lenses. So it's like, were you shagging me last night, or did you put the Brad Pitt mask on me again? Like, do you think? I don't think we're that far away from that either. I think if Neuralink takes off, that'll.
But some people are into that, like putting a real mask on their partner.
Sure.
That's a thing.
Les Dennis could put livestock on a human.
Some people are into that. I'm not personally, but I live in a world where you tolerate that kind of diversity. But other sex robots. My I remember I saw they come out with this new sex. Oh, I don't know if it was a robot, but a sex doll, and it could talk, and that was like the big thing. It could talk, and I thought I couldn't understand why would anyone want the doll to talk, because I thought that was the point.
Yeah.
That they didn't talk. Yeah, I mean, maybe if it's giving you the sports scores or something like that, then you're like, well, okay, in that case, that's all right. But that you kind of want to turn it off. That I thought was the point. But apparently not. Some dudes are into that. Some dudes are into projecting livestock onto their doll.
Sure. Yeah.
And have go a deep fake directly into their retina.
I guess it's like where you're talking about, you may or may not want them to talk. It's like people would want a sex robot that is as authentic as possible up to exactly that point, and then they'd be like, and just make it quiet. Just, no moaning, no nagging.
No nagging, no moaning, and I'm not going to make a cup of tea afterwards.
No. But yeah, like so I started talking about sex robots, and then I went off into sort of lenses and deep fakes and stuff. But like the examples I've seen of sex robots have been, I think, progressively more realistic over the last like 5-10 years or so. Because I remember like the first news report I saw of one, I was like, I mean, who is fucking that? That's like that would be a creepy uncle kind of thing, But then recently they do look a bit more. I mean, I don't think I'd bang one still, unless we're talking an Ex Machina. Is that the name of the movie? Ex Machina. I don't know.
I think so. I think I vaguely recall a film like that.
Yeah, where the guy
I don't.
He was like an entrepreneur, sort of tech guy, and he had all these sex robots and stuff. And me and a friend of mine were like, I mean, they do look pretty hot. But
well, I mean, it's lockdown, and I live alone, so I mean,
anything goes.
My standards are really quite low at the moment. So
yeah, I feel you. And then I know we've been chatting for a while, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I just want to talk a little bit about and I suppose this is where, well, firstly, I might need you to define what the difference is between like AI and machine learning, because I'm getting interested in both of them, but I don't really know. I don't want to feel like a dick when I'm telling people like, I want to learn machine learning, and then actually really what I'm talking about is AI. Or are they both kind of interchangeable terms?
There's certainly overlap. I think AI is, effectively a more generic term, whereas machine learning is, kind of a specific application of it.
Right.
Where, first of all, it's machine to machine.
Okay.
Not person to person. It's machine learning, and it tends to be used in quite specific applications, particularly, industrial control systems. It's used in maybe financial analysis systems, things of that nature. Whereas AI is really kind of a more broad idea, where, from an IBM perspective, we use the term cognitive. You'll see a lot of IBM marketing use that word. And I think the thinking is that anything that has a cognitive element to it is probably AI, and machine learning would have a cognitive element to it.
Right. Okay.
So you could argue that machine learning is an application of AI, but AI, it's a very broad thing, and what it meant in the 70s, or how it was being envisioned, is very different from what we have now. We have AI nowadays.
Sure.
We have systems that I think we would all agree are definitely AI. So I guess that's kind of the difference of what is AI. And in fact, I think there's even some machine learning that you might even say, that doesn't really seem like artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I always think of like the loosest or simplest idea or example of AI for me as a consumer is usually those sort of like auto message back bot things that you go on Argos and it says like, can we help you, and then you ask it a question and off it goes and gives you something resembling a response that sounds like a human talking to you.
Yeah. But all of this troll farming and everything we've been talking about around social media
Yeah.
and this sort of post-truth world that we now live in, to me that is all AI.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
some of it even is machine learning.
What's
So
what's the most frightening example of AI or most frightening project that you've heard of so far, where you're like, that does not sound good? Is there anything that scares you, or are you kind of relaxed?
I'll be honest, Crimea rattled me. Because it was quite obvious what was happening, and you could see it unfolding in social media, and then that false messaging and that false narrative got into the mainstream media, and it was all clearly deliberate.
But
is there
like a project within like a company or a government somewhere where somebody said like, oh yeah, like, have you heard that Neuralink is starting this project, and basically what they're trying to do is connect blah blah blah, like, and then you're there as a tech professional, and you're like,
I'm not sure it would be appropriate for me to talk about any of those things.
Sure, okay,
in a podcast.
I mean, if it's sensitive information, obviously, yeah, fine.
Well, it would be naturally. It would be just by the very nature of the question.
Yeah, I mean, if it helps. Basically, nobody's going to watch or listen to this, so it's it's.
Well, yeah, indeed, they probably won't. But yeah, I mean, obviously, well, I'll give you an example of a position that IBM took.
Yeah.
And this was at the corporate level. I think Ginny Romney was the CEO at the time, and I think she had a say in this decision. And obviously, so. From a cyber perspective, there's basically two positions. There's defensive cyber, where you protect your network, firewalls, blah blah blah, and offensive cyber, where you go and infiltrate and collect information and maybe even attack someone else's information system. So there's two postures. You can have offensive and defensive, and naturally, our governments in particular. But likewise, even corporations participate in both actively, defending their networks, but also actively doing offensive cyber. And IBM made a decision at the corporate level to not participate in any offensive cyber type activities, even if it was for legitimate governments. Well, we could argue, is the UK a legitimate government, or the US, they're evil empire, blah blah blah. But even these governments, they've made a corporate decision at the highest level to not participate in those sorts of activities. And there was, in fact, a bit of a scandal. It was a bigger scandal in Asia, whereby there was a project out in Singapore, in fact. A legitimate project for a legitimate bank, but part of that project was developing offensive cyber technology so that this bank could spy on their competitors.
Right. And
it came out and it got into the news, and like, oh my God, IBM is an evil giant corporation doing this terrible thing. The reality was it was a fairly legitimate project. It wasn't nasty Russian troll farms, trying to incite riots. It was, a little less unsavory as that. So the point is, IBM then made a corporate decision to, remove itself from any of those kinds of projects.
Yeah, that's quite
much to my chagrin, because I quite enjoy those sorts of things.
I was going to say, like, that's quite an unusually and depressingly rare ethical stance to take for a global conglomerate. Like, I mean, if you look at people like HSBC, who've been, dragged through the mud for funneling money, like billions, from drug dealers and shit, and then whenever they get caught for it, it's like, all right, we'll pay the fine, Yeah,
indeed, and probably the fines are a lot less than whatever they made in doing the crime in the first place. Indeed, it was both an ethical stance and IBM. And now I'm going to sound like I'm preaching IBM, but the reality is IBM has a fairly uh, impressive history and legacy in taking ethical, taking the ethical stance. But it wasn't a purely ethical decision. What happened in Singapore was quite scandalous, and it did damage IBM's reputation. So there's a clear reputational issue at stake. IBM doesn't want to be involved in anything like the Ed Snowden scandal.
Sure. Yeah.
And he exposed the PRISM project, and everyone's like, oh, PRISM's awful. I'm not convinced it necessarily was, but that's maybe for another podcast.
Sure.
The point is, it wasn't purely ethical. They made a very, it was also a business decision. They didn't want to be exposed to that kind of bad press, effectively, and look bad, and the ethics of it as well.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I could talk to you for hours, man. Like, I had a stack more questions. I'd love to.
I'd be delighted to do another podcast.
Sure.
This was fun for me too, because I'm here in lockdown with very little to do and not a lot of human contact.
Sure. Yeah. Well.
And I get to pontificate.
Yeah. I mean,
so,
for me, this is great because. I was saying on, I think, the last episode or the one before that really, like, I'm a father of two. It's me and my girlfriend. So even before the pandemic, social life pretty much cut off. And now we're back in lockdown again. Basically, I've had to resort to starting up a podcast to book in a conversation with one person every week.
I should do the same.
You should.
But because I'm also a comedian, right? So I don't have any friends to begin with.
People don't know this about comics, do they? We burn through friends like fucking petrol over wood.
The bringers,
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking is like my social life has become like a bringer event. I've now burned through all of my friends to go for walks or whatever.
Yeah.
And now they're sick of me. So I sit at home and have nothing to do. It's not fun.
I mean, if ever you feel too popular, what you should definitely do is go through 4 years of open mic comedy and then have a couple of kids and then go into a pandemic, because that really clears them all out.
That does clear the slate of friends, indeed. Throw a divorce in there.
Oh, yes. The few that were left at the end of that, I guess then you got to divvy them up.
Yeah. Too bad we don't have time, because I could just do my whole divorce set. I've got 20 minutes of divorce jokes.
Yeah. Well, next time we'll do like auto trading and crypto and a bit of divorce as well.
Yeah, but if we go back to because that's my big area is this false narrative that is happening in the world right now. I think it's a lot more serious than a lot of people think, but that's because we've just seen yesterday what can happen.
Yeah. And it's one of these things where it's so gigantic when something like yesterday kicks off, but you also have to kind of take a step back and go like, okay, well, we're obviously feeling very reactionary and very emotive about it all at the moment, so let's maybe take some time to digest and consume what took place. The only issue I have with that is that I always feel like it's people in the centre and on the left who are expected to take time and understand and forgive and all that, whereas on the right I always feel like it's like, oh yeah, just storm the Capitol, burn this effigy of this person, write a few death threats, start up a Facebook group, it's all fine, they'll forgive you.
Yeah, I tend to feel very much the same. Big disclaimer, I'm very staunchly a die-in-the-wool liberal, have been my whole life. So, yeah, I see the value of, hang on, let's all just breathe and take a moment and assess.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the nihilist approach. I think there's a lot of people that stormed yesterday that had nothing to do with the election, nothing to do with anything but their biases. Just they just want to burn everything down, and here they're being given a pass. They're being told go burn it down. So that's what they went and did.
Sure. Okay, Richard Brice, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, I had a blast. Cheers.
We'll see you next
Bye.
time. Cheers. Bye.